Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of EDTalks. I'm with Dr. Bobby Lowe from BYU. He's a director of mental performance. Bobby, welcome to EDTalks.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
I say this all the time. I'm super excited, but I really am because this is what I love to do. I love performance and especially athletic performance. And the work that you've done in this area is just astounding. And so for those that don't follow you, I'm going to put all your links in the show notes so they can start following you. You put out tremendous content, and it's all about sort of that mental framework and how really your mental skills, being able to make real-time decisions, during an event can be the differentiator between podium finisher and non-podium finisher. And so I want to dig into that a little bit more with you. So thanks for being here, and we'll just jump right in. But first, tell us how you got into this, because this is so interesting. Like, how did you end up being at BYU?
Yeah. So a little bit of a long story, and actually yours, our paths crossed kind of through a different venture. But so I was an athlete growing up. I played basketball in high school. I ran track and field, and track and field was the sport that I tended to have a little bit of potential in. And so I kind of pursued that. But I remember being a little bit of an underdog type of athlete, undersized, not as athletic as other people. And so I always knew, okay, you didn't have to be the most athletic person out there to be successful and even to win, right? But I always wanted to know what was that piece that helped somebody like me, kind of get over the finish line and achieve. And so I started to study and started to look for, like, what was it that Tiger Woods did? What was it that Michael Jordan did? They obviously had the skills, but they thought differently, and you could see it in how they performed. So I wanted to know what that was. I went to college as a pole vaulter, and after my freshman year, I had a really frustrating freshman year, and I actually sought out the mentorship of a close friend of mine. His name's Dr. Craig Manning, who is also at BYU, but pretty well-renowned sports psychologist in our field. And I basically just said, teach me everything that you know. And I started to apply the mental skills. I tried to apply the thinking patterns that helped impact my performance. And it was through that experience, I went from being kind of a mediocre, average, middle of the road freshman pole vaulter to an NCAA All-American. I was a top 5 jumper in college, went on to compete 3 years professionally and got a chance to chase my Olympic dreams. I didn't quite all the way make it there due to an injury in my foot, but those were opportunities that for me, I'd only dreamed about, right? And so kind of applying the mental side, mapping that up with the physical side, and then what that did for my career is really where I fell in love with sports psychology. After that, picked up my family. We moved out to Missouri. We finished our education in sports psychology, and I did management consulting for a little while, and that's where our paths crossed through some consulting in healthcare and some work that I did there. And then I went into the technology world, learned how to infuse psychology into technology to help people. And then it was through that I found my way back to BYU when I got reconnected with Dr. Manning.
Yeah, that is so cool. And I know this could be a tough question for a PhD person to answer, perhaps because of not having the data sets in front of you, but it just, something you said really struck a chord with me. And that is, can you put a general percentage on how much better the performance could be for an athlete if they have the right mental framework? So for instance, if I'm only 80% as good, I'm running an Ironman. If I'm only 80% as good physically, is it a 20% bump that I could get? Is it a 10% bump I could get? Like what is that gap if you have good mental, preparation?
Yeah. So what I'll say is that it will always go up. Most people have not maximized their full potential. So if the equation is you got to have potential, you got to add in high level training and learn all the right skills. And then the next part of the equation is you got to remove the interference. You got to remove the distractions and the things that impact your performance. If those are the 3 pieces, most people have potential. Most people do all of the training on the physical side. And then where they fall down or where they haven't fully developed the skill set is on that mental side, right? So most people don't maximize their performance. It will always go up if you can harness and really develop the mental side of the game. Now, that being said, there is a fun study that I love to cite when I get this question. They did a study with distance runners. And they broke them up into two groups. And the first group was the control group, and they basically said, "Okay, we want you to run. We're going to have you do this endurance test. We want you to run, and then we're going to track how much output, endurance, energy output that you produced, right? And then we're going to take your times and everything else." And then 4 weeks later, they did that again, and that was your control group. Okay, the second group, they did the baseline test. They had them do the endurance test. But in between, they taught them how to talk to themselves in a proactive way, right? So they taught them this mental skill of self-talk, right? What do you say to yourself while you're running, while you're competing? And the difference that they found from first test to the second test was an improvement. But then the comparison between the control group and the performance group, they found that the group that was talking to themselves correctly or using this skill, 22% higher output, right? Energy output, endurance, so they could run faster, run further. Just by that one, and that's only one skill. Just by that one skill applying, they saw a bump 22% with distance runners. So pretty impressive there.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. The reason I was asking too, because I know that when I go out there and compete, like on Team USA, I know, because I look at bodies and all that kind of stuff, I know that I'm not the most fit, and I know that I'm not the most skilled physically, but I will beat a lot of people. And the only thing I know to contribute it to is sort of that mental, aspect. Like you just gave one clue, and I want to dig a little deeper here in a minute. But one clue, and that's this how you talk to yourself during these sort of events. So it really resonates with me what you're saying.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's amazing.
And Bobby, I imagine there is a corollary in the business world where these same sort of skill sets that we're talking about here, although you get to practice this with teams and the athletic department stuff at BYU, and you get to see it. But it also has benefits, right, in the business world for leadership in general.
Yeah, no question. No question. And two of the most common mental interferences that I run into when I work with players and executives. What is a bit fun with my role is I do still do a lot of corporate coaching and executive coaching, where I get to work with, I like to call them corporate athletes, right?
Yes.
And I get to work with them in their domain, right? The mental skills transcend all the domains. If you're a musician, if you're an athlete, if you're a corporate athlete, if you just in your family life, right? All these skills can be applied in these different domains. And so the two that I run into the most, one is confidence. Believe it or not, you can have people at the highest level of their game and they still have self-doubt. They still run into scenarios where like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm the guy that can take our health system from 200 million in annual revenue to 300 million, or if we can improve our patient outcomes by X%, right? Am I that person, right? So believe it or not, many still struggle with just that self-doubt. And really it's the balance between, it's that inner voice in your mind and you're battling it, right? Like where's the self-doubt? And then you have to combat that with a lot of the self-confidence and the self-belief. And all of that is derived from how you talk to yourself. What phrases, what words that you're using in your mind, right? That's occupying that space in your mind. The second piece that I run into is focus. So this ability to control your attention and direct it to both relevant tasks and relevant information. A lot of times in the corporate world, I mean, we're problem solving and we're handling puzzles that come to us all the time, right? You get a puzzle that comes to you that's impacting the business, it's impacting the organization, maybe it's impacting the people or patients. And a lot of times we react immediately to those scenarios or those problems instead of pausing for a second, taking in all the information, directing our attention to the relevant information and the important data or the important cues, and then starting to make our decisions. Some of that takes a few minutes, but most of the time people are just reacting. And actually they're not getting their best decisions, or they're not getting the best information when they go into that reactive state. We see that in sport too, right? you're an endurance runner. Let's take a hypothetical scenario. You're transitioning from the swim to the bike. The bike comes right after.
Swim, bike, run. Yeah.
The swim to the bike, and let's say the transition doesn't go well. Maybe you slip, maybe you fall, maybe you lose, a few seconds or even a minute or so. How long are you carrying that mistake with you as you start your bike? Some athletes, it's minutes, it's even the first 2 or 3 miles, and they can't let go of that mistake. But even hanging on to that or getting into that reactive mode will impact your performance. And we do that as executives in the business world too.
Bobby, this is so good. We're definitely, this is a teaser for our podcast that we'll be doing together and releasing. This is amazing. I want to end with this. Can you give us like one example of an athlete that we might have heard of and how you've seen them really get next level because of all the sort of that mental skills that they have?
An athlete? Well, I do have to be careful in protecting names, folks that I've worked with directly, but I will give a shout out at BYU. We had our distance teams, our men's and women's cross country teams that both did a ton of work. They put in all the effort and the training and got themselves physically ready, but they also did a lot of mental work and got themselves physically ready. And both of them ended up winning NCAA team championships at the cross country event this year. Some folks may be following our football and our basketball teams, which have produced a number of wins this year. But again, a lot of them have been putting in pretty significant, obviously the physical side, but a lot of work on the mental side as well. But yeah, we work with athletes, in the NFL, in the NBA, all across sports.